Hey everyone, it's Steve Tolan and here we are for another episode of Change the Game, and it's a hot one today in Sydney. So we see the jacket get removed. That's the reason we'll have to get the aircon pumping up in here. But today I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. Tom Sermanni, a legendary football manager with over 40 years of professional football experience. Good friend and a guy who's done so much in the world of not just professional sport, but specifically within the women's game. And we're going to talk about everything from leadership, kind of communication, leading with pressure. So without further ado, Tom, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Steve.
Thank you very much. Good to have you here, my friend.
It's great to be here.
Mate, appreciate it. Thank you very much for making the journey across the bridge.
Yeah.
Because we all know, coming from the north, that's not an easy thing to do, coming the other way.
It's a privilege to be invited up to the North Shore when you live down south. Thank
you very much. So, mate, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, I guess what you've kind of done in your career, and, why do you believe, I guess, that you've had such an impact, specifically, I guess, on the women's game?
It's interesting. I don't look at myself and say I've made such an impact. I'm just, you can tell from the accent, I was brought up in Glasgow in the 60s, 70s, very different environment, very working class, blue collar, heavy industry, tough city kind of thing, and just brought up in what was a normal working class environment in those days. And like all boys who were reasonable at football, wanted to become a football player.
Yep.
And fortunately, through various stages, I achieved that goal along the way, and then went from there into coaching, and my life's just gone in a whole variety of directions that I would never have dreamt of or never planned, and I've never had a plan. I've always find it challenging when I'm talking to young students where you're supposed to be people of my age and tell them to have a plan. And I'm somebody that's basically never had a plan in life and just gone along basically with opportunities, with connections, and with people, and I've just kind of lived my life that way as I've gone along.
Mate, you're also very, very humble. You talk about it, the things you've done in your career as if you're managing or running an amateur soccer team. You know what I mean? And I think it's one of your greatest values. And the other thing is you're way too calm, I think, to be a football manager. But mate, I really appreciate it. And if you look back over, because obviously you had a successful playing career before you kind of moved into management. Talk us through, guess, some of the kind of the highlights or some of your kind of favourite points.
Well, I think probably the favourite points when you look back is becoming a professional player. You had two pathways. In my time growing up, you could become an apprentice at 16, do a 2-year apprenticeship, and if you're good enough, sign on as a professional, or you could go down the track of being a semi-pro player and trying then to get sold on to a bigger club. And that was the pathway I went. So I went into a small club in Scotland that basically sold a player every year to survive. And whilst I was doing that, I went to college and got my teaching degree, so that I had a bit of education behind me. And the good thing about college in Scotland in those days, you actually got paid to go to college, because they were trying to encourage working class people like me to go to college, because you didn't have as the first person in my family that actually went to higher education. So I had that background, and then I was fortunate enough when I was reached about 23 that a team called Blackpool in England came in and bought me, and then I became a professional footballer.
Yeah, how good? Probably very different in those days.
A different world, different game, different lifestyle, different everything. And you look back, one thing I'm loath to get into, I catch up with old guys my age and a bit younger, and the first thing you say is like, the game used to be better, and you reminisce. Yeah. And I don't think it was any better, it's just that you were younger and you were involved in it. And I think but it was different, and it is different, and life is different these days. So
it's interesting because I see this even in sales and recruitment. It was me, nearly 50, and you look back and go, things were different. But you're clearly evidence that you evolve, right? So age, you can have experience, but you kind of have to keep evolving, right, and kind of keeping up with the trends, because as you say, it's a different perspective. There was no social media, no whatever back then.
Yeah, no, you need to, and you can't get caught up in an old-fashioned mindset. You've got to move along with the game. You've got to move along with life, and particularly if you're involved in a sport, because you're involved with young people who are at the cutting edge of things, and you've got to stay relevant to them. And even now, when I look at the game now, and I see the things that are involved in the game, like managing is far more complex now than it was when I started out. It's basically, I would relate a story. When I went to the World Cup in 1995 with the Matildas, we had 6 staff, and that was one more than we should have. We got an extra nutritionist. I went to the World Cup with Canada a couple of years ago here in Australia, and we had 25 staff. So immediately there's a lot more complexity around the job, a lot more managing. And as I say, we can relate back to the old days, but you've got to move on with what's happening.
Very true.
Otherwise you'd just lose touch.
Very true, very, very true. Leadership, again, getting to know you, and it's, I'm in awe, because someone who's well known for I can go from 0 to 100 very, very quickly. You always stay very mellow and stay very calm, right? And that's clearly not, it's a skill. Yeah. And when we talk about leadership, there's the famous example of the Fergie kind of hairdryer treatment, right? But I wouldn't say that was you. No,
it's not. I'm probably not the perceived orthodox football manager in that sense. And that's evolved a bit as I've gone on in time, because what I think is that you've got to be authentic to who you are, and you've got to manage the way that you manage to be successful. And you can pick things up from other people, but you can't be other people. Yeah. And to be honest, when I went my transition from so I went player, coach, and then into manager and coach, is that you did, and that was the late 80s, early 90s, you did have that perception that you were the coach, you were the guy in charge, you were authoritarian, you do this, and you think that everybody's going to follow that. Yeah. You soon find out it's not. You find out you're actually dealing with people, you're dealing with young people, you're dealing with young people with ambitions, anxieties, and all the above. And you've got to manage at the best to get those players to believe in you and to perform for you. And there's no one set way of doing that, and everybody has their own way. And as I've gone along and got more established, I think you get more confident in yourself and in your managing style. Yeah. And you just basically go along that way. So although quite often in the outside I feel calm, when the game's on and when things are happening, the inside's churning over like everything else. Yeah. So another key part of leadership, communication. Yeah. And I'd love for you to give some examples. So, you shared some stories when you're going into a team, maybe confidence is kind of low. So can you share an example of where you've delivered some fairly brutal feedback or whatever, you know what I mean, and it's been received relatively well? Because again, sport feedback is constant. Yeah. Business, it's different, but equally I think a lot of people actually shy away from it. Yeah. So any thoughts on that? Yeah, well, I think the first thing, and again I've made all these mistakes as coaches, is that you feel that one thing I've tried to do as I've got into the game more often is my feedback has to be accurate and concise. We're quite often as coaches talking a lot of cliched terms, and we're often not prepared to 1v1 actually give real specific feedback to players. And I found that is really, really important that you're often delivering bad news, and it's not easy doing that, particularly if you're crushing a career of a young person. But in relation to, when I went back into the Matildas, probably a year and a half ago now, the confidence was very low in the squad. They'd just come off an unsuccessful Olympics where they had high expectations of doing very well, and in tournament football, it can turn in the blink of an eye one way or another, and it just didn't go well, and obviously the coach had then gone on to another job. The team were in limbo. They didn't know what was coming. And then I've turned up, and in an interim basis as well, which again it gives them not a great deal of certainty. My first observation around the squad was that there was an unintentional divide between the senior group of players and the players that are coming into the squad to try and get established. And that, you know, part of that was just when you look through the senior players in the Matildas, they've lived more of their life together with the Matildas than they have with their family. You know, a lot of these girls have been together in international football for more than 15 years. And it's not like a job where you just, with an international team, it's not like a job where you go in and then you go home at night. When you're with the team, you're there, you're 24/7, your family, your friends, you're the whole thing and all the stuff that goes with that. Anyway, I kind of noticed a bit of a divide between an us and them.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with the senior players who were quite taken aback by it, because they had no perception that was actually happening. They just felt they were going on with the job that they normally do. I had some individual chats with the younger players. Most of them I didn't know, and they didn't know me. So it was a combination of having those chats and then trying to bring the group back together. And I've always believed in simplicity. So, you know, a lot of stuff is really, at the end of the day, quite simple. It's people dealing with people, people working with people, and people connecting with people. And so, you know, I kind of try to emphasise little things like making sure that players spread out amongst at meal times. You know, and they went over and chatted to players and things like that. So just all trying to bring back all those simple things to bring the group back together as a group.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. You've had some experience working with me on some events, you know, in the recruitment space, right? And we have this. There's often high performers. We call them big billers. Yeah. You know, where they're doing really, really well, and maybe have a little bit of swagger, and then you have new people that kind of come in, right? And there's always this perception, well, that's because or whatever. So it's interesting. So do you, when you're saying you've got this, I wouldn't say ego, but that must be a fine balance, mate, between established players who are on social media. So, and did that differ, do you think, from where it was in the 90s, or has that always been the same with Star? Like, kind of, you know, those with a bit Star kind of.
No, I think it's changed.
Okay.
Not that the players or whatever have changed, but the game's changed.
Right.
So when you go back to the 90s, early 2000s, well, go back 6, 7, 8 years ago. I would take the Matildas there. You know, they was still the individual players were relatively unknown. The big players in the team now are some of the best known athletes in the country. Yeah. In fact, Sam Kerr is probably one of the best known athletes globally. So they've gone from being like these young kids just coming into a national team where the players were basically part-time footballers at best, to now being, you know, star players with huge followings and the demands that go with that. And so that, in some ways, that although you don't necessarily change as a person, things around you change. So you have to be, you know, at times you have to be more cautious. I remember when I coached in America, I coached a player called Alex Morgan with the national team and the club level, and Alex was a huge star. And a very kind of introverted person. Not you know, you had to really get to know her before she opened up. She's a lovely person, but not out there. Sam is kind of much different personality, and but you could understand why Alex was like that, because wherever we went, when we landed, we were travelling from Orlando to Portland or to Dallas or whatever. We landed at an airport. There was an entourage of people there trying to get Alex's signature, talk to her, do all that. So you automatically your life changes. Yeah. So you have to be a little bit more cautious at times, and I think that's the thing that's changed a little bit. That, you know, players are now dealing with fame, which they would never have thought they had to deal with.
And you obviously, you had a stint with the US, and the US was probably the most progressive in terms of women's football. I actually remember Alex Morgan. I worked for a US firm, I remember in 2016, and the company was based in Baltimore, Boston, Detroit, and even the guys knew Alex Morgan. Yeah. Right, she was a celebrity, not just in the women's game, but a celebrity.
Yeah.
Do you think there is a difference then managing men or coaching men and women?
There is a distinct difference.
Okay.
I think, and I often refer it to males and females.
Yeah.
The difference between me and my wife and things, and it is. I think the fundamental things are that women, well, firstly they listen so much better. They take on information so much better, and they actually follow that information in a football sense.
Yeah, I think most there's many who would agree with that comment. Stopping there.
And the downside is they remember.
Yeah.
They remember so much better.
Equally, there's nothing there. I'm not going to argue with that on that point, as my wife would say this morning.
Yeah, and so I think when you're dealing with female players, you've got to be far more conscious of your communication. It has to be so much better. It has to be more thought out, more thoughtful, more concise. In general, if a guy's playing on Saturday, he probably doesn't care whether you say 10 words to him or 2 words to him.
Yep.
The female athletes tend to be constantly looking for feedback, ways of improvement, and things. So, and as I say, it's a bit like males. And we could go out for a night, we could sit in the pub and whatever, and just drink, watch the telly, and barely say 2 words to each other, and we have a good night. Whereas, females will go out and they'll interact much more.
Yeah.
And that's the same when you bring it into the football. Generally as well, that I think males have a more brashness, a more confidence, a more individual look about themselves. And when it comes to sport, that's a good thing. Females are much more team oriented, probably a little less comfortable standing out from the crowd, so to speak.
Interesting. You talked, I shared a little bit this before, so the game has fundamentally changed since the 90s. You kind of highlighted some of this, but I guess we talked about social media, etc. What's kind of altered, but what's remained the same?
The thing that's remained the same, the fundamentals of the game. I think we've gone, I was lucky enough in the early 90s to coach at the AIS, and AIS was at the forefront of science and technology and things, and I think that we did some of that stuff in football. We're kind of ahead of our time. All that stuff's caught up now. Sports science is a huge part of the game, sports medicine, all that sort of stuff now. And I think we've potentially, a bit like bureaucracy, gone a little bit too far on things and gotten away somewhat from the actual fundamentals of the game. And that's the thing that you've got to, I feel that you've got to keep going back to, is that the game is still the game. The principles are still the principles, but as I say, in the modern game you've got all these other influences around it, generally for the betterment, but you've also then got to be careful that you don't get caught up in the noise, and that you still stick to what the fundamentals are that make you a successful player and a successful team.
A phrase I share often is I talk about 2 things you can control: attitude and kind of activity, right? In a footballing sense, similar kind of thing. How hard you train, right? You often hear this: I'm a great player, but you're not training very well. So it's interesting. And then on that point, I always say control what you can control. Yesterday I talked about the 3 M's, and people always say to me, Steve, what are you seeing out there? And I go, well, the M, the market, the first one. You can't change the market. Your mindset, you can fundamentally change that, and mastery. If you're upskilling, you're having a much better chance, right? And this is where the whole kind of concept of where I see what we can learn from sport. So I want to go back to when you kick things off with the Matildas, because it's a great story, which will obviously come to, I guess, how you ended your career, which I think is just amazing. But talk us through, because literally it was amateur, it was grassroots, right? What was that like when you kind of kicked it off?
Frantic. So essentially what happened in 1993. Sydney was given the Olympics in 2000, and women's football became an Olympic sport. So virtually overnight, because women's football became an Olympic sport, became eligible for government funding. So it went from just you talk about kitchen table organisations that were the women's football was generally, because women's football, men's football was separate at that time, and it was kept alive by a group of real passionate people that just loved the game, but with no resources. So then all of a sudden there was somewhere between 700,000 and $1 million a year through to 2000 put into women's football. And the first thing they wanted then was to put a full-time coach in place and start programs.
Yeah.
And I was coaching in the men's program at the Institute and was approached to see if I was interested in taking on that role. And I did, much to this surprise to the general football community that knew me then, because it would have been probably seen as a bit, what are you thinking?
Would you? I know it's not. What drove you to that? Was it you thought this is the future? Was it just something different? Was it that curiosity?
Yeah, it was just something up here. So I think, again, the thing that if I look back in my career, what I've probably enjoyed doing best, or what I've done in the sense of being a little bit more successful, is build things. Mm. And you get some coaches that are good at going in at a top level and bang there, and then you get coaches that sort of try and go in and build things. And I think that suits my style and personality. Yep. And appeals to me a little bit more. So the challenge of the job appealed to me. You were virtually setting up a structure from zero. Yeah.
And that was 90. It was 95.
That was 90. No, it was 1994. 94. It started middle of 1994 is when I took on the job.
And I remember that because it was the last time Everton won a trophy, 95, and I was there, which seems like quite a long time ago, but I'm sure would you were.
There we go.
But did you ever expect, and I know the answer to this, so talk us through, I guess, getting the call back, right, in terms of obviously going in after the Olympics, and from where the game was there to where it is now, I mean, it must be mind-blowing.
It's just, you can't fathom out where it's come from to where it is now. Yeah. And to be fair, where it's come in the last probably 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. So it's gone along, gradually improved. And you still fight. In the women's sport, you're always fighting to play catch up. Yeah. And it had chipped along, got a little bit better. We went with the Matildas from having no money to having a per diem to having a contract and a CBA agreement. So as you chip along, they've gone from being amateurs to being semi-pros to being pros. But the last probably 4 or 5 years, the growth in the game has just exploded. And it's one of those where people like myself and diehards from the game who have put a lot more into women's football than I have, can sit back and say, well, we told you it had this potential, and it suddenly, it's come to the fore. Yeah. And it's amazing the number of people that jump on the bandwagon when it sort of happens. But I don't think anybody could have dreamt that this could have happened, and particularly with the Matildas. I think probably the catalyst, if I look globally at the catalyst, I think it's when the big clubs in Europe suddenly realised there's actually a value in women's football. A commercial value. Yeah. And if you look back 10 years ago, Manchester United didn't have a team. Yeah. And if you probably talked to Fergie 10 years ago, he'd go, what are you thinking? We're not interested. But I think they started to see the potential, and then it's just gone on from there. And then, nobody could have predicted what the World Cup here, 2023, would have been like.
I remember, because I had my daughter Eve, she's like, have you got tickets? And then I was like, jumped on Ticket Tech and realised they all went about 12 months earlier. Yeah. I remember it well, but I remember it took over the nation, right? Like it was captivating, and that really kind of built it. And
the thing that made it even more full, the Matildas' journey through that tournament. Yeah. If you made a film like that, people would say, nah, you wouldn't believe that. I mean, they were on the verge of getting knocked out until they beat team I was with, Canada, knocked us out. Yeah. Then they had the penalty shootout, and so it was like a Hollywood movie in a sense.
Yeah. What do you think the secret of the success has been? Apart from you, obviously. I'm joking. You're way too humble.
It's obviously down to the head coach. They just appeal to the public, and particularly the young, I would say predominantly female, but young male public as well. Yeah. And they just manage to get a connection with them. Mm-hmm. And when you go to games, you see, you've gone to the game.
Yeah,
I have never been to a football match with that number of people, that crowd.
Yeah.
And the response of that crowd is to the team.
Yeah.
It's just mind-blowing. And the first time I noticed it was before I was back in the job. They played one of the stands, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, in a qualifier, Olympic qualifier, I think it was. And it was an easy, like, it was a kind of game. If it was soccer, there'd be a few thousand turn up. The stadium, Marvel Stadium in Melbourne, I think it was, filled to capacity.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I was actually I'd been at a game like that. And I was watching the crowd, and I was just absolutely astonished by the support. I think they were 5 or 6-0 up after 15 minutes, and the crowd was still going mad. Like, as a football purist, you're like, this game's, I can't watch any more of this game. But the fans are just there to see the fans and the connection they have with them. And in fairness, the players like going above and beyond to keep that connection going. You know, they stay out for 45 minutes, an hour after games, signing autographs, getting photos taken. So they have a real connection with the support.
So final couple of questions, but when you were asked to go back in 24, it was funny because that was the first time we met.
Yes.
It was the West Tigers, and I think you said you were off to Germany when you that night. But I remember the story, and you said, you know, you thought it was going to be open your black book and see who's next.
Yeah.
So talk us through getting the nod.
I basically met up with Heather Gary. Heather was on the board at that stage, and she's one of my ex-players, and was actually the most capped player until quite recently. And so they were having the search, obviously, for the new head coach, and we had a meeting, and I thought it was about, you know, throwing some names, and we chatted around some names and some possibilities, and she basically said, but we need an interim coach before we can come in and sort of that. I said, okay. I said, let me think of some names that you know could come in and do it. And she basically said, no, it's you. I said, you're the name. That's it. We haven't got anybody else.
Yeah.
And at first, I thought she was joking, to be honest. And it took me a couple of minutes to say, well, I actually said, well, let me think about that, because I was completely.
Because you were doing your Sudoku.
I was doing, trying to think about who else could maybe come in and do this job. And she said no. And to be fair, when Heather says it's you, then it's you. You know, Heather was no prisoners as a player and stuff. So, and that's how it came about. And my anticipation was to go for 2 or 3 months, as I was kind of led to believe, and ended up being there for 10 months. And,
And why do you think they wanted you specifically?
I think it was an easy transition. I think because the experience and the background I had in the game, and the knowledge I had with the players, because, you know, interestingly, when I went to the Olympics just to watch some games in France, and when I watched the Matildas against the US, 9 of the players that started in the Matildas had played for me in my previous spell up to 2013. So there's a connection between the players and me, and some of the players played for me in club level in America and things. So I think it was an easy fit for somebody that was able to go in without having to do an awful lot of adjustment.
Yeah, I think, going back to my first point about what you've done for the women's game, probably not a lot. I think everything you've just said over the last half an hour, I think you've had a massive impact on the game, and natural choice. In closing question, to anybody, not necessarily in sport, but leading a team, you know, trying to motivate players, what's one bit of advice that you give to anybody that's kind of managing people and trying to get the best out of them?
Be authentic. I think that's the most important thing, and trust. Learn from people what to do, and more importantly, what not to do when you go into that job, and just treat people like people. You're the head of the organisation. You know, I say this when I speak to people about coaching, as a coach, you're the only person in the organisation that really connects with everybody. You know, whether it's outside people like media, etc., whether it's the chairman, the owner, the president, down to, you know, the person that cleans the boots. You connect with everybody. So it's important that how you manage that connection right throughout the organisation. So I think it's important to understand that, and the sooner you understand that, I think the sooner you get better at managing everything.
And on that note, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
No, I really appreciate being asked to come along.
Mate, it's been fantastic. Where'd you go with that? Where'd you begin to dissect lessons in leadership, not just from the sporting world? You know, takeaways for me, the power of communication, having a vision and executing that vision. You know, Tom talked a lot there about building relationships and building trust, and so much that we talk about on a daily basis now. You know, we talk back going through the 90s and the evolution of sales and recruitment. Technology can do so much. It's still a people business, and it's a contact sport. So thank you very much. Appreciate it, and we'll speak to you again soon. Thank you.